Ink-a-dink, 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 ink-a-dink. Wow!
Okay, we'll be ready to go on the air in a couple of minutes. Okay. Good morning, Basil BuddhaCat presents. We're not on the air yet, but we can take your call after we go on the air. May I ask who's calling? Okay, Basil, it's Rick Santorum, former senator from Pennsylvania, and he says they may in fact change his name to from Santorum, because apparently that's got kind of an odd meaning. To they want to change it to sanitarium. Okay, well that's probably not a good choice either, Mr. Santorum. It's not really not sure if anybody wants to be referred to as a sanitarium. Okay, yeah. Basil, he says, at this point, anything is better. Okay. At this point, anything is better. Oh, okay. Okay. Maybe we can get you back on the show when we start taping. Thanks for calling. What? Oh, good morning. Welcome to Basil BuddhaCat Presents. My name is David Stevenson. I'm Basil's co-host, interpreter, and chief gopher. Basil BuddhaCat, occupying the other position here, host of the show. Basil, as you know, has some great bona fides. He speaks every language there is to speak, including cat. All 937,812 words in cat. And he says that just wants to remind you kids again, and he's going to keep at it because he thinks it's important, and repetition is a good thing when you're reminding people to do something which is beneficial to them, to their families, to how their house runs. He says, learn to speak cat. Those of you that have a cat in your household, or more than one cat in your household. Basil's very insistent upon this because cat is a very, very intelligent, very intuitive, it's a great language, he says. It's a language that you need to learn to speak. And go to it. He says you can learn it in a week or two if you put your mind to it. And in fact, since there are more households in America that have a cat than there are households that have any other individual animal, there are more households in America where cat is spoken than there are households that, you name it, Italian, Irish, Polish, Ecuadorian, Lithuanian, Portuguese, Spanish. There are more households in which cat is spoken than any of those individual languages. So in fact, cat really is America's second language and needs to be treated with the proper deference and respect due to it. Okay, we were talking last week on Friday night. We were talking to Clint Eastwood. At least we had a call-in from Clint Eastwood, and we had Basil taking the role of speaking for Clint Eastwood because he thinks he speaks. Basil says, look, I can speak better for that nut job than he can speak for himself. In fact, I won't make a jerk out of him the way he made out of himself out at the Republican National Convention. But Basil wants to add one more usage of the letters in Clint Eastwood. One more way that you can rearrange the letters in Clint Eastwood to give a little bit more insight into the workings of this this guy who's pretty complicated, he says. Basil says Clint's a pretty complicated guy, and however, he could best be explained in a familial sense, and his party is big on family and big on family values, so they say. But Basil pointed out to me that if you take the letters in Clint Eastwood and rearrange them, you come up with docile, twat, son. Okay, hey, we didn't make this up, folks. This is what you get if you take the letters in Clint Eastwood and rearrange them. Docile, twat, son. So, what's all that about? I mean, do you? Aren't you being a little rough on him, Basil? I mean, all he did was make a jerk out of himself one time. Okay? Okay. Hold on. We'll see who this is. And a happy Sunday morning to you. Welcome to Basil BuddhaCat Presents. May I ask who's calling? Basil, it's Clint Eastwood. Let's double check this. Tweety? Yep. Tweety says it is, in fact, the cell phone of Clint Eastwood. We seem to have covered most everything about you on the show Sunday night. I'm not sure if we want to go too much more in depth on your comedy act at the Republican National Convention. Okay, he says he's gonna have Dirty Harry come over and teach us that out of the three words that we just got out of his name, Clint Eastwood, docile, twat, son, he says only one of them is true. 1 out of 3 is true. Oh, twat. Oh. Got a little bit loud there for a second. Okay, no, he says it's actually son. He is someone's son. And he's very happy to note that even though he was diagnosed in vitro as having chronic stupidity, that his parents still chose the right thing to do and brought him into the world. Okay, then, Mr. Eastwood, I'm sure that even if chronic stupidity were your only issue, that's certainly okay. Basil says we'll call you back when Basil sees fit to do so, when he sees it's the right thing to do. Okay, thanks for calling. Okay, so what exactly are we going to talk about this Sunday morning? Basil says he wants to go back to the subject of Mitt Romney because it's important that we spend some more time discussing Mitt Romney. The many facets of Mitt Romney Basil is intrigued by. He says that Mitt Romney has been on every side of every issue in American politics. He says he's been there, done that, He's sort of like Bob Dylan in a sense. And what do you mean by that? He says the way that Bob Dylan has actually belonged to every religious group at one time or another in his life. He's obviously born Jewish, Robert Zimmerman. Been Jewish, he's been an atheist, an agnostic, a Christian, a Muslim. He's been pretty much everything. And Basil says that's okay. That's okay for them entertainer types. Those entertainment types. That's crazy. That's okay. That's fine. But for a guy that wants to be president of the United States, Basil says that person should have a history, should have a clearly thought out position, should have intimate knowledge of what they did during their working life. As you know, Mitt Romney was what they call a venture capitalist, and that's to say he fired a lot of folks, acquired a lot of companies, broke them up into pieces, shipped a lot of jobs overseas, made himself and his investors a lot of money, ruined a lot of jobs, ruined a lot of American households. As I say, sent a lot of good American jobs overseas because they could be done for less money in a situation where they're being performed by people that had no labor protection, in countries where there were no environmental protections. And Basil says that's pretty crass. He says he only wants to go one step outside of Mitt Romney to find somebody who's in fact more crass when it comes to job creation. And that would be a lady that's created about 600 jobs here in Connecticut as the owner of World Wrestling Entertainment. Says that she created some very intriguing jobs, some of them in legitimate capacities, but a lot of the jobs she created were for men and women basically making a fool out of themselves, being degraded, being forced to degrade themselves. Yep. Linda, as she's known to have shortened her name to, because it's easier for people to vote for her to remember Linda than a two-name name. Linda says that just because she got in the ring herself and called out some wrestlers, including some female wrestlers, and really, in fact, said some very grievous and very brutal things to them, and very disgusting things about them and their humanity. Just because she did that was only in fun. He said she understands what Clint Eastwood was doing. Clint Eastwood was just trying to add a little humor into the convention and distract a lot of attention from the keynote speaker, the candidate himself. Now, Basil, we watched the convention. We saw everything that was said by Mitt Romney. What exactly did he say? Okay. Yeah, pretty much. Basil says he asked the media folks afterwards what exactly Mitt Romney had talked about during his speech. And the response to a person was, "Hey, how about that Clint Eastwood? Pretty interesting guy, huh? What the heck was he doing?" So you feel like, it sounds like you feel like that Clint Eastwood's appearance at the Republican National Convention was pretty much just a distraction to make people forget about Mitt Romney's speech, or lack thereof, and just pretty much create the smokescreen that gave the media something to talk about. Okay, fair enough. Is there anything about the convention that you found interesting beyond that? Basil says, yeah, it was that little guy, Ron Paul, and he doesn't mean little in a disrespectful sense. He means he's diminutive. He's a small guy. It's a fire plug, though. He's tough. Basil says that the Republicans somehow managed to hogtie him in the back room, gave him a mouthful of toilet paper, taped his mouth shut, put him in a cat carrier, put the cat carrier in a gunny sack, put the gunny sack inside the cargo hold of a plane, and sent him up to us. Basil. No, that wasn't Ron Paul. That was Ron Paul in Basil. And of course I'm addressing Basil, who's been our guest on some shows, talking about how he was a member of both households in Sanford, Florida, how he was living in a household of George Zimmerman, and one night he went out through the cat door, and the door closed behind him, and he couldn't get back in, so he wandered the neighborhood and ended up being taken in by the family of young man's father. And sure enough, so he got to know both families intimately, and talked at length about how nothing much to tell about either one of them, both very nondescript families, very low-key, nondescript families, and not much difference really, except for the fact that one was on the giving end and one was on the receiving end of a bullet. Okay. So at any rate, did you run into Ron Paul on the way up here? Says no, he actually didn't come up in that cat carrier. They must have taken that cat carrier from John Roberts' house and taken it to the convention and stuck Ron Paul in it and sent him packing. When in fact Basil's our guest Basil, not our host Basil, he came up in style. He said he got up here, he thumbed it, and he happened to get a ride with a fellow named Jerry Seinfeld, who was coming back from visiting his family in Florida, driving in an old Cadillac that he had gotten his father, and his father gave back to him, and yada yada. So Basil actually got transportation back up to the Northeast, back to Connecticut, in style, and that's why he's here. He says he's glad to be back. Says he's got nothing new to report. He hasn't been allowed back into George Zimmerman's household because of what happened. But Trayvon Martin's dad has continued to take care of him, and he says he's treated well there. He was treated well in George Zimmerman's household until he ended up coming up here to talk on our show about the two families and about that fateful night. But at any rate, we're going to talk a little bit more, if you'd like, about, he says, pretty much said all there is to say about that. Basil, what else do you have on the agenda for this fine Sunday morning? Basil says he's interested in talking with Piccolo. Oh, okay, he is here. Okay, I'm just going to reach across here. And, okay, Basil's got a guest, and we'll call him Piggly Wiggly. And Basil says that our guest Basil, living in Florida, can tell us a little something about a little grocery store chain called Piggly Wiggly. And now you're not old enough, Piggly, to remember the grocery chain, but I lived in Florida for a while when I was in Miami, when I was very young, and learned a lot about segregation from Piggly Wiggly, because Piggly Wiggly was owned by a fellow that liked to come to the door of each of his supermarkets from time to time, each of his Piggly Wiggly stores, and greet the customers, kind of like the way that they do at Walmart. Except for he had a little different greeting for white customers and black customers, he said. Piggly's telling us that he would have a handshake for the white customers, and for the black customers, he'd pull a stick out from behind his back and shake it. Okay. So, what exactly, what else can you tell us about Piggly Wiggly, or about the South, or about things you've learned in your lifetime about how America's progressed? Do you see progress in America? Okay. He and Basil are having a side conversation. And I have to sort of break it up here because, we've got a show to do. Both of them are saying back and forth to one another that America has come a long way. Not exactly been borne out by the fact that a black man has been elected president by a pretty substantial margin. Not exactly borne out by that because we saw kind of the old, dark, ugly side, no pun intended, dark. The old, ugly side of American racism has come out since President Obama. We're seeing a pretty slender minority of people raise a lot of ruckus and being pretty loud and pretty vocal about the fact that they can't figure out how in the world a guy... Now, they don't use the word black anymore, but that's important because it's important that in America we don't use even talking about race at all. What we do nowadays is we have code words. And we saw the code words come out actually during the Democratic presidential primary in 2008 because we know that Bill Clinton made a lot of remarks that perhaps he would have liked to have taken back afterwards because they didn't do his wife Hillary any benefit by him saying it. But when Barack Obama won the South Carolina primary on his way to the presidency, Bill Clinton had a remark about something about even Jesse Jackson won South Carolina, and somehow that diminished apparently the credence of Barack Obama winning the South Carolina primary because apparently Clinton was alluding to some reference that perhaps the black candidate always wins South Carolina. Okay, well that's obviously not the case because we know South Carolina still has a lot of residual racism. But at any rate, during the Clinton campaign, there were a lot of remarks made by Bill Clinton, by Ann Lewis, a big Hillary Clinton supporter, Geraldine Ferraro, a big Hillary Clinton supporter, and they didn't want to use the N-word, obviously, because that's not that's kind of out of touch with who we are as Americans now, apparently, except on conservative bite, which is one of the right-wing political rags that Basil likes to comment on once in a while and try to correct people in their Basil says in their stupidity. But anyway, so they came up with some other N-words. They said that Barack Obama was inexperienced. They made some remarks about him being naive. And now, post-election, they've somehow figured out that President Obama is alternatively a socialist, a communist, a Marxist, completely anti-American, apparently. And it just confounds Basil, and quite frankly, it confounds me, and I suspect it probably confounds anybody that trying to figure out what's with these folks. That first of all, those words are not interchangeable. Socialist, communist, different things. Marxist, obviously, a different thing. But they get the words confused because I figure they all kind of mean the same thing in their mind's eye. And these guys just seem to be, I don't know, it's hard to explain. They just haven't come to grips with the fact that a president of the United States, elected president of the United States, could be a black guy. It's hard for them to grasp, it seems. Very hard for them to grasp. I mean, we hear a lot of talk about these days about talking, not on conservative bite, but in more polite social circles. mostly Republican, but some Democratic also, about how, okay, help me with this, Basil, okay, about how soon whites will be, and they say this very clearly, that soon, not very far into the future, at the rate we're going, whites will be the minority. Now, there's a little confusion there because even if a particular group of individuals have less than 50%, make up less than 50% of the population, the voting age population, however you want to look at this, they compose less than 50% of the population. In a sense, they're a minority, but only if you glomp together. Did I say that right, Basil? Yeah. Only if you glomp together every other minority group. Blacks, Asians, Latinos, if you glomp them all together into one megalith, one group, which of course obviously they're not, with the only thing they have in common being that they're not white, then they would be the majority. But that's not the case. They're not all alike. They have different aspirations, different hopes, and generally pretty much their hopes and aspirations are pretty much the same as every white American too, when you come to think of it. But what they are is smaller minorities. They're still minorities, and in fact, even if whites compose less than 50% of the population, they're still not the minority. And I think Basil wanted to point that out, and I think that's well said. And I think at that we're going to have to wish you a good morning and a good Sunday afternoon. This has been Basil BuddhaCat Presents. I'm David Stevenson, Basil's co-host, interpreter, and chief gopher. Thanks for joining us. Have a good day. Bye.
They say they'd rob your grandma blind on Wall Street, on Wall Street. Fritter her away her Medicare on Wall Street. And Pharma Oil and their pet fox don't care if she lives in a box, so long as they wear platinum jocks on Wall Street, on Wall Street. Meow.